The European View Podcast. Your place to navigate the insights of our policy journal, brought to you by the Martens Centre. With Sara Pini.
Hello and welcome to the European View Podcast, your way to navigate through the main issues of our policy journal with valuable insights from the authors themselves. I'm Sara Pini, Senior Research Officer at the Martens Centre, and today, joining us from Ireland, we have Thia Hennessey, who is Chair of Agri-Food Business at Cork University Business School and Head of the College of Business and Law. Of course, we will speak about the article that she published in the latest issue of the European View, which is titled Can a Rural Renaissance Be a Reality? But we will also have a glance at her new article, which will come out soon with the autumn issue of the European View. Of course, you can find this and all the other articles on our website, martencenter.eu. So Thia, welcome and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Sarah.
So, as I said, let's start with your first article. I find it really interesting because you identify the main reasons behind these rural aging and rural depopulation trends that we are observing in Europe. But you also put forward some concrete policy proposals in order to seize a number of emerging opportunities and potentially reverse these trends. What do you think are the most important and the most urgent of these proposals?
Sure, Sarah. Thanks for that question. So the article starts off by looking at the contributors to the current decline in rural areas and populations, and it speaks quite a lot about the role of agriculture in that regard. And we've seen that because of mechanization and economies of scale and global forces that the numbers of people employed in agriculture have declined, as we can all witness to, and that in turn has impacted on rural areas and services to rural areas, and that's almost become a self-reinforcing cycle where less services are available and then fewer young people want to live there, and then it becomes less viable for those that do live there, and we've greater outward migration. So I suppose a lot of the article focuses on what we can do with the agriculture sector to tackle some of that declining trend. And I've looked really, I suppose, at the rise of sustainability as an agenda, a political agenda, the role of farmers in tackling some of these issues, such as climate change, biodiversity loss, protection of water quality, and looking at how, to a certain extent, that farmers are being seen as, the perpetrators or the reasons for a lot of these environmental negative outcomes, but that the policy can be flipped to make them actually the custodians of those resources, and that there are some opportunities there, which we've seen in various European policies over recent years. So that's kind of one dimension, and the other dimension then is kind of the whole hybrid working and possibility to live and work in different places and the new opportunities that unlocks as well for rural areas.
Often farmers are seen more as the cause of climate change, that actually actors that can improve this, that can help fight this battle. And this is something that I really like in your article, that you put the emphasis not just on objective factors like economic factors, but also on perceptions. So how do you think we can change this public narrative on farmers and rural areas?
Yeah, I think there is a real social dimension to it, and within the literature, it's been referred to as the recognition gap, and that's where the value or the role of certain cohorts in society is not appropriately reflected in the media. It's not appropriately valued, and that can lead to kind of, I suppose, very undesirable social outcomes. So parts of society feeling left behind, and I think we have an example of that with the farming community when it comes to climate change. That there tends to be a lot of blame. And while we all consume food and we're all responsible for the carbon that's related to the production of the food that we consume, it's somehow that blame is being pushed back on farmers. So I think that the article talks about the policy changes that are needed to empower farmers to tackle climate change. And while a lot of that is known, we know that the steps that need to be taken, we know the technologies that exist that farmers can adopt, we know how they can improve their environmental footprint, how they can restore nature, but it's just the funding mechanism and the incentives for that to happen really still isn't clear. And I suppose that is a lot of the policy debate at the moment. And just as we speak today, the new Commissioner for Agriculture and Food has been announced earlier this morning, and I think that will be a key challenge for him in terms of his vision for agricultural policy going forward to give farming community, I suppose, the empowerment it needs to tackle these issues.
Of course, we have already witnessed a bit of a change, right, in this narrative, both in the Parliament and in the European Commission, especially after this big wave of farmers' protests that we have seen this year. But do you think that this new political landscape that emerged from the last European election could do something to further improve this vision of farmers in rural areas?
Yeah, I mean, the commentators say that the farmer protests have had a big impact on the election and that have contributed maybe to the loss of power and position of the Green Party. And I mean, we've seen that in a lot of national elections as well around the world. I mean, it's been an extraordinary year for elections. More than 50% of the world's population have voted this year. But I think that there's two arguments. There's maybe a loss of enthusiasm for the green agenda, or there's also the mainstreaming of the green agenda. So we've seen that green policy items have come much more to the fore, even for the very kind of centre right parties like the European People's Party. And having that continuity of power now with Ursula von der Leyen coming back in as the president there, I think can see us continuing to move forward with the Green Deal. But I would think maybe much more emphasis on what we might call the carrot rather than the stick. So where before we were very much looking at a reduction in pesticides, a reduction in fertilizers, and that was very much being maybe imposed at the farm level, that we're seeing the language changing to, I think, in the most recent speech, she has been talking about nature credits. So that would be very much about rewarding farmers for work done. But I mean, the big question then is who pays, of course. We have a finite budget to fund the common agricultural policy. We have a cost of living crisis across Europe where consumers are really resisting higher food prices. So, will that extra funding that's needed to push that green agenda forward come from consumers, from businesses, or from taxpayers? And I think that's the real question.
And what do you think are the priorities at the policy level? You spoke about the Green Deal, you spoke about the common agricultural policies. How can they be more in tune with the real needs of farmers and in general rural areas? Because when you speak about rural areas, we don't speak just about farming.
Yes, of course, yeah. And I suppose we have seen in recent years more of a renationalisation of many of the policies, and particularly within the common agricultural policy. And you can see the advantage to that because the environmental issues, the social issues, they can be very local. So to understand some of the local challenges, I think, is important in that regard. So I think, again, supporting and incentivising the change that's required and understanding the local situation in which people are operating as well is very important.
Thank you very much. Now, you speak even more in detail about different EU policies for rural areas in the article that is going to appear soon in the upcoming issue of the European View, the autumn issue, which is going to be titled, your article, The Policy Challenge of Balancing Sustainability and Food Security. So can you give us maybe a short preview of the main arguments of your article?
Sure. I suppose this article starts by, reviewing recent changes in the common agricultural policy and policy more generally at a European level and talks about the rise of the green agenda, but sometimes maybe at the cost of food security, and reflects on the period since the Ukraine war where basic commodity prices really increased significantly, and that impacted on global food security in developing countries, but also on the incidence of food poverty in Europe. And it really kind of talks about how do we square that very difficult circle or achieve that balance between ensuring food security at a low environmental impact on the environment. And I suppose it reviews some of the recent and impending business related directives that are arising, like corporate social reporting directive, the due diligence directive, the legislation around greenwashing and evidence claims of labels and all of that. And again, it comes back to the point I made earlier that while all of these legislative developments are really important for, ensuring a greener supply of food, they do introduce additional costs into the food production system. And in a time where consumers are very price sensitive and where we know that they will resist increases in food prices, that those costs need to be absorbed somewhere. And equally, we can see the pressures at the farm level in terms of farm incomes and the value being paid for products. So it's just, I suppose, trying to understand how when we introduce these new initiatives and they introduce new costs into the system, where those costs will be borne. So it's really that balancing of food security and sustainability.
And sustainability, not just being green sustainability, but also sustainability of incomes, right? Because the problem is that everything turns back to the same point, that the who is paying the price.
Yes.
Consumers are not willing to. We are not willing to lower our climate expectation. So how can we protect farmers' income and then ensure them a decent income?
Yes, that's it. And I think, like, you'll often hear members of the farming community talking about the expectations of the businesses that buy their products, and that they expect a lower carbon footprint, but they expect it for the same price as they did previously. So it's not that there's a price premium for a more environmental product, it's just that it's what the market expects. And they will argue that they can't deliver that. And then there's the whole, other debate about imports into the European Union from third country markets, and are they being held to the same standards? And if not, are those products coming in and being sold at a lower price? So, I mean, it's really a challenging environment, I suppose, and it comes back to how we can afford to pay for more environmentally friendly food that we all demand, but that only some of us in society can actually afford to pay a higher price for.
Yeah, so a very difficult circle to square. So thank you very much, Thea, for this really interesting discussion. And stay tuned also for the following article, which will appear soon. So for those listening in, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and discover all the interesting insight of the European view, both past and upcoming ones, on our website, martencenter.eu, and on all our social media channels. Thank you, and stay tuned for more.
This was the European View podcast, your place to navigate the insights of our policy journal. Follow the Martens Centre for more.